I would maybe be a bit controversial. It would be wonderful if the students at the end of their learning journey didn't even talk about the assessment.
Hi, I'm Cathy Minett Smith. I'm the Dean of Learning and Teaching in the College of Business and Law. Welcome to this episode of Higher Education Matters, which we've called the Assessment Ecosystem, which I will try to explain to you where that title came from. So during the 22-23 academic year, if some of you may remember, we had a year-long conversation in the university focusing on transforming assessment. At the start of that work, Amanda Coffey set us all a challenge, and I'm going to read from my notes now so I can get it word for word. We want our students to be confident learners and to leave the university with amazing memories, along with the skills, knowledge and experience to change the world. So no small challenge there. As that year progressed, Rachel Cowie, who was with us today, and I coined the phrase the assessment ecosystem, as the work revealed the dependencies between various functions of the university. And that's what we're exploring in this podcast today, how those various functions interact and what it would really take if we're going to transform assessment to create an environment where our students are supported to thrive. So I'm going to introduce the people who have joined me today. So go to Maria.
I'm Maria Casado Diaz, and I am the Director for Learning and Teaching at the School of Architecture and Environment.
Hi, my name is Khadiza Hossain, and I'm the Vice President Education at the Students' Union at UWE Bristol.
And I'm Rachel Cowie, I'm Deputy Registrar.
Right, so I'm going to start with you, Maria. Our staff and our students spend a huge amount of time on assessment. What would you say is the primary purpose of assessment?
I think assessment is an opportunity for students to demonstrate all the knowledge they have acquired, all the practice they put into the different assignments, and be able to show what they have learned in that particular module. Okay,
so you see assessment as something which happens after they've been engaged in their learning, and then it's the thing they do?
No, not necessarily. I think it should happen from the very beginning. The moment they start the module, it has to be intrinsically linked what they're going to be learning and how they're going to be assessed, and they need to understand how the two things fit together.
Okay.
So assessment, I would say, is an opportunity at the end when they have to submit something specific for them to be able to demonstrate how they get on with all that learning and what they achieve in those 12 weeks of teaching or 24 weeks of teaching.
I guess sometimes the mode of assessment is also part of the learning. So, for example, presentations, we all know that we go out into the world and we have to present constantly. So that's also part of the learning throughout the module.
Yeah, I think it's the same. I mean, for the primary purpose, if you ask me, I think it should be, to support students in learning, learning and development, and also assessment should be an integral part of the learning journey, so that they can build their skills, knowledge throughout the university life, and definitely they should, use the skills when they're, graduated from the university, so that they can use it, in the practical life, I think.
So I think we're all kind of like articulating assessment as learning rather than assessment of learning. I know the buzzwords. So at the end of their time of study with us, what would you hope that students would say about the assessment experience when they finish?
I think if the assessment, assessment was clear, fair, it was timely, they got their feedback in a timely manner. I think that's the thing. That's what student actually wants. Yeah.
Okay. See, I would maybe be a bit controversial. It would be wonderful if the students at the end of their learning journey didn't even talk about the assessment, because it's so integrated into what they've been doing, and yes, it captures what they've learned, but we do have an issue where students are so focused on that end point of how did I do, what mark did I get, and if there was a way of transforming assessment so that it was actually, it just was not invisible, but it was part and parcel of what they do.
And I think at that point I should definitely agree with Rachel, because it should be so integrated that it should not be the measurement of the outcome. I mean, definitely, I totally agree with you.
And I guess that's what I was mentioning earlier, that it's sort of part of the same thing. Yeah. So the moment you start a module, you know what I'm going to learn, how this module contributes to my sort of program, what I'm going to learn in here. and how I'm going to be able to demonstrate that learning, how I'm going to be assessed. But I think it's that sort of notion of it's an ongoing process. So every week there's an learning activity, there's some participation, there's sort of a contribution towards that final assignment that means everything is really well integrated. So they might not be talking about assessment particularly, they might be talking about what did I learn in this module.
Yeah, which would be a much better way of them articulating themselves.
It's an interesting thought, really, isn't it, Rachel, to hope that our students would go, assessment? What assessment? But are those pride moments equally as important?
Yeah, there's a motivational aspect to it. I mean, we're all like that, aren't we? We like to know that we're doing a good job, that we're, getting something along the way. But it's trying to move it away from the absolute focus on the end result and into much wider kind of what has the learning experience done for me.
That's a good thing for us to hold in our minds as we go through some of these other questions. So one of the key elements of this ecosystem of things that we're interacting is obviously the students, because it's the students who are doing our assessments and experiencing our assessments. So I thought we could explore a little bit from the student's perspective. So I'm going to be coming to you, Khadiza, understandably, I think, first. In our surveys, our P-TEST surveys, our NSS surveys and our course surveys, we actually do quite well in assessment and feedback compared to the sector, but it's still an area where year on year we say we need to focus on it and try and improve what our students perceive and the way they answer these surveys. So what do you think might be some of the reasons why students traditionally mark assessment and feedback down in surveys?
I think with the assessment, I'm just going to read from my notes here. It's basically, the NSS data suggests that while assessment allows students to demonstrate what they have learned, which is like 81%, and the perception that feedback helps them improve is lower. So, this indicates like student might not always see assessment as fully integrated into their learning journey if the feedback loop isn't effectively closing the gap between, performance and improvement. So I think that is very important there. And also if we can have like, more, various sorts of like assessment where students like, they're actively participated in getting the feedback and basically if they, for example, if they speak to the module leader, program leader, lecturer about, the assessment, basically their whole learning journey, like how they can improve. It won't even feel that, the feedback is that important because they're getting the feedback from the very beginning of their course. They're not waiting for the end result, like, okay, I'm gonna give my assessment and then I'll wait for my feedback. It's an ongoing process. If that works, then I think that feedback loop will, that gap will get closed. Okay. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So closing the feedback loop. Maria,
I would say that this might go back to how students understand what assessment is for. And I will argue that the staff feel equally frustrated when we get some of these results because they think I put a lot of effort into this particular assessment to support the students, to be able to meet the learning outcomes, and then it didn't happen. I'm equally disappointed with the marks. So I think is something, in my opinion, to do with the students' understanding of, or students' disappointment on the amount of effort they put into something and the results they go back, which go back to putting a lot of emphasis on that particular mark. And I think sometimes if they have been able to work on that particular piece throughout the module, being able to access the sort of formative assessment opportunities in the classroom, or submitting draft, or doing short presentations with the sort of the key points to see how they're doing. It helps them build the confidence. It helps them think about the standards and how that level of effort might equate to a particular grade. And I think sometimes there's also a bit of naivety in terms of how much effort they think they need to put in order to do well and to submit a good piece. And I think that might come from, coming from college and, how that operates a very different system. And when they come into university, sometimes it's difficult to sort of benchmark, is this enough? And I think sometimes the amount of independent learning that takes place outside the classroom is not so evident. And I think I speak from experience with talking to my academic personal tutees, and I always go with the question of from 1 to 10, considering the mark you go, how much effort you put, how do you think, and it always surprises me when then we go into the specifics. So how did you prepare for this particular piece? What do you mean? How many hours? How did you engage with this task? And it's always a bit, it doesn't seem enough, but in their head is that perception that I put plenty and I covered the key points and I should have got, I don't know, a 2-1, and I didn't. And that's sort of the disappointment with the marks.
No, I was just going to say, because obviously we're doing a big piece of work at the moment, aren't we, around feedback. Yeah. And going back to Khadiza's point around students kind of wanting the feedback going kind of continuously. And we've talked quite a lot about, do they understand when they're getting feedback and how it is informing their learning. And I still think, we've obviously said in the group, there's going to be quite a big focus on literacy and them understanding what they're reading or what they're hearing in terms of their feedback that can really help them. And I think sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes coming from schools, they are like, oh, well, the teacher has said this, rather than actually going back to your point, Maria, taking it themselves and reflecting on it themselves. We need to try and get students into that more reflective way of receiving their feedback, I think.
And I think that for that reason, we need a similar sort of feedback thing in every school, like a similar sort of feedback template or something that's coming from different modules, different programs, because as you mentioned, the constructive criticism, the feedback thing is a piece of constructive criticism. Sometimes student will take it very personally. So I think if we can have more, seminars on, how to use those feedback, how you can use it, more effectively for the next assessment that's coming up. I think that should really work for students.
Okay. So it seems that there's something about consistency which helps students recognise that feedback is happening. But you're touching on the holy grail there, Khadiza, which is how do we help students to constructively use feedback? And that's what the whole sector is talking about. It's like the holy grail, which is...
No one's cracked it yet.
Nobody's cracked it yet. So what are some of the things you think that we could be doing to help students recognise it and support them to use it? Because it's human instinct, isn't it, to kind of think, oh, I didn't do that very well, and to kind of put your head under the covers.
I read something interesting while trying to think about these things that we're going to be discussing today. And it was this notion of, it was the significance or the importance of formative assessment as something integral, again, to the learning experience. So every week we're developing this and, they are learning from this. But it was something about, it was a notion of research into learning, and it was from both the staff and the students' experience. So you have these formative assessment opportunities in the classroom. That means that the staff can be again benchmarking how that assessment brief is being understood by the students and thinking about how they can support them with reaching the standards. And from the point of view of the student, it was that, making it is part of research into my way of learning, that sort of personalized experience. Okay, I got this feedback, how I'm going to use this, but it's also helping me address or understand myself better in terms of this is something I don't have to worry about, I do very well, but this other aspect that the tutor or maybe my peers have mentioned in the feedback is something I need to concentrate. So it's sort of a research opportunity to get to know themselves a bit better and how they can improve the performance while engaging more actively with that, both again on the staff part as well, because sometimes people think they have designed them as amazing assessment brief and very difficult to understand, and then they're very disappointed when the students don't particularly value that. And I think that's very important, making it a bit of part of the activity. You're doing research into your academic practice, putting the assessment and your academic practice in, trying to see how you're performing at this level and what you need to do next.
I think another challenging situation is where the feedback becomes very generic, where student, they don't feel that it's very individualized and personalized. So when it's very generic, they don't know how to, improve. It's like a generic thing. Okay, so which part exactly I should be, doing? Giving my effort and should improve myself. So I think if from that point, if we take it and give some personalized and very specific points, like, oh, you need to, improve this bit. And also you mentioned about marking rubrics, which was amazing. Do you want to talk about the marking rubrics?
Oh, we've swapped seats.
Throwing the question back at you.
I suppose it's that role of the marking rubrics, isn't it? So that a final mark, might be disappointment, but it's not a surprise. Because it's clear what you're aiming towards and exactly what the staff are looking for. It's really interesting, though, this idea about personalised feedback, because we've almost strayed back into, at the end, what did I do well, what could I do better? Yeah. And yes, I totally get what students are saying, but then there's that pragmatic element of the assessment timelines and the volumes that some staff are processing and marking. So is the opportunity for that personalisation better within the learning experience rather than at the end? And would there be an argument to say we don't do personalised feedback at the end because we do it all through the learning journey?
Yeah. And if you think about what I was going to say we, but I'll say you have designed in terms of the foundation year in business and law, or, you've built in as part of the programme those feedback points so they don't get to the end and go, okay, I've failed, because that's been built in. So that is the personalised feedback going through it. I'm guessing at the end of the year there will be some more generic feedback for students in terms of, okay, this is what you need to do to succeed going forward into level 5 programmes. But the more we can do that kind of thing, and I know there are plenty of examples across the institution where you've got portfolio approaches or lab work or whatever, so students are learning, but do they recognise it as feedback? Do they recognise it as assessment in some ways either? But and I'm hoping through UWE programmes we'll see lots more examples of different ways of assessing.
If I may, on that point, I think communication needs to be really a big part here between staff and students. I think whatever feedback you receive, if the communication between the teacher and the student is solid, then it will be really easy for them to understand and improve. Like, for example, if I don't understand the feedback, whatever template it is, and then I just go and ask the tutor that can you please explain this bit? And if the communication is frequent, then it's going to be very easy for student to understand and
It's really interesting, actually, this conversation, because I guess if we can crack that feedback within the learning and focus on the learning as opposed to the assessment, that's when we would probably really hit Amanda's challenge around assessment being an amazing moment.
Yeah.
Because rather than the student thinking oh gosh, did I pass that? The student would be optimistic and be able to have that pride of going, yes, cracked it.
Yeah.
So it probably is the key to the challenge which Amanda set us all a couple of years ago.
I was thinking, when you mentioned foundation, I was thinking in terms of curriculum design and where do we put those opportunities for students to really develop that assessment and feedback literacy. And really is in this foundation and year 1 when we need to put all the effort so they can test, they can try. It doesn't matter if they fail, it doesn't matter if they reset, because those marks don't count towards the degree outcome. And there's the opportunity to really work with the student closely to make sure everybody's on the same page about how this is going to work, what you need to engage with, this is where the feedback comes from, this is how you can use it. And I think that's what we need to put all the efforts. Because I think in level 5 and 6, or year 2 and 3, then by then they feel a bit more confident, especially they've been able to test and try different ways of different assessment methods, and they can see where their strengths are, what they need to work on. I think that's really, really useful and valuable.
We don't do enough to really promote that within level 3 and 4, to say this is a year where you can experiment and get used to studying higher education as opposed to school. We could maybe do much more in that space.
It would be really helpful to also create a baseline, especially with the students coming from very diverse experiences, to, okay, we all come here, we all go here, so we have the capacity to do well, we managed to get into university, there's nothing that should be stopping us from achieving a good degree, but we all come from very different experiences, so to put that effort at that level, to make sure they all understand the standards and they all understand how they need to be working, the amount of work they need to put outside the classroom. All of those things need to happen then, so then we kind of let them be and keep on focusing on the the ones that arrive. Yeah.
We kind of need to get back to that terminology of reading for a degree, don't we? Because we don't talk about that anymore. And so people come in and go, well, what are my contact hours? Well, actually, this is much wider than that.
Yeah. Sounds like we should have called it the feedback ecosystem, not the assessment.
Well, no, because it's all one and the same.
The learning, I think the learning.
The learning ecosystem, yeah.
If we change focus a little bit now, because one of the other key parts of this ecosystem is the staff, and you were touching on earlier, Maria, it's not just students who can get quite frustrated in the assessment space. Staff equally find it as frustrating because they spend an awful lot of their time in assessment as well. So it isn't just about improving things for students, but also how can we support our staff to engineer those amazing moments, which is what Amanda challenged us all to do. So what are some of the challenges that you think staff might face in doing that?
Yeah, I think, because we could spend here all day, and I think if we kind of move past the curriculum design, we have put together a really good sort of assessment strategy for that module, and we're going to work on that. I would say the main challenge, and I talk about myself as well, is when you have worked really hard to sort of produce this really nicely curated learning experience for the students. That means every week there's an activity that's going to be happening, and you think about the content, how that's going to be spread across, I always talk about the 12 weeks of teaching in semester 1 or semester 2. And you have put all that effort, and you see how everything fits together to scaffold that, to support them in the learning, to make sure they are progressing their assessment. And so by the time they get to the end, it really is a question of tidying things up and submitting, as opposed to that hustle of, in a week I'm going to do everything that I didn't do in 12 weeks, which, let's face it, is sometimes the case. And then suddenly half the class is not there. And you come to the classroom and you have prepared all these things, and you say this is really key for them for this piece of the assessment or the assignment brief. And then I get there and half the class hasn't turned up, and you think, oh, it's fine. So I do the class, and then everything will be available anyway, because we can all miss a session for a variety of reasons, and that's also a very important part. And I think the move to Blackboard Ultra perhaps will get us to think a bit more about how we organize materials and content and all of that. So fine, they can catch up online, put all my materials, everything is ready. But if you do that more than 1 week or consecutive weeks, that means you have missed a chunk, of the learning. That means that I'm not confident that the students are prepared when they come back to do these extra bits. So I think that is student engagement. Consistent student engagement is probably one of the biggest challenges, because you have prepared everything based on the assumption that they will be able to engage on a weekly basis with the things that you have prepared. And that is not always the case.
I think in this era, it's a problem of people waiting for, for the last minute. For example, if I have an assessment, I would probably wait till the end to start my assessment, which is not right at all. I should, start doing it from the very beginning. But I think this procrastination bit is a very challenging thing that, student, I think they should actually, I'm pretty sure they're aware of it, but then how to get out of that procrastination and then start learning from the beginning. I think from the starting block and until 6 weeks, 7 weeks, they're pretty good. They're attending classes, they're going to seminars, and I think there's a point where student, they step back. I don't know, it might be about their work, could be everything's getting so expensive, cost of living and all of that. So I think how to get out of that situation. And you mentioned about student engagement. It's in every sector, I think. So yeah, that's a question that I ask myself, I ask everybody. Yeah.
I think that's why we called it the ecosystem, because there are lots of things that are probably influencing that student engagement, and what are some of the things that we might have some control over, and what are some of the things that maybe we don't.
Yeah, and I think it's I guess, we keep talking about assessment of learning, whereas actually we were talking assessment for learning. And I think trying to get students to really understand that it's, and I get a student doesn't want to, they'll want to learn some of the content before they can start their assessment. I get that. But actually, if we're looking at assessment in a very different way, so that, again, going back to what we were saying, the continuous bit, then you've taken that kind of last minute panic thing away from them. I think the other things are, you know, we need to look at our timetables. We know they're very different now. Students have got a lot of things on their plate, as you say, Khadiza. And, you know, sometimes they're working because that's the choice they've had to make. And they will catch up online if it's online. So I think we need to start thinking of our students actually very differently than we have done in the past in terms of what they've got to juggle, carers, responsibility, work, all that kind of stuff. So it's not just assessment. It's that whole kind of, I was going to say, programmatic approach to life that we need to think through when we're designing programs and designing assessment.
I think this definitely student needs to feel there's a value on attending that session, clearly. And I think the most successful modules that I know, for example, in my school, are modules that have integrated fully that sort of notion of we're coming, we're going to cover some content, and then we're going to practice, and then you're going to do a little bit on your assessment, or, you know, this sort of opportunity to not leave everything at the end. But also you mentioned, you know, everything is programmatic, but the systems are not programmatic yet.
No,
so when we fill in the timetable details, this is on modular level. Yeah. So it's only at the very last minute that we actually get the chance to look at the program level and thinking, this doesn't look particularly good. They come, you know, 5 days a week, some days only for 2 hours. And it's very difficult at that point with the extent of our courses to be able to adjust that. But absolutely, we need to move, we are moving to the programmatic sort of side of things, and yet most of the systems are still modular level. Yeah. And that is that's very complicated.
You're absolutely right, and that came up in a conversation I was having this morning with somebody. But yeah, our systems are still modularized. Our processes are, and we've got to do something around that. And that all impacts on that kind of sense of that academic experience and how the students are feeling what we're delivering. So yeah, we've got to catch up with ourselves.
I'll just give you my recent experience. So recently I went to Portugal for a wonky trip where in University of Lisbon, the vice rector mentioned about one thing, that is our teaching getting outdated? Why? Because technology is getting so powerful. AI is a big issue now. I mean, not a big issue. I mean, it's, you know, it's the present, it's the future. So should we rethink about our, you know, teaching method, teaching, like assessment, everything in general? So as a, you know, as a tutor, what do you think about it?
Yes, we said we have plenty of challenges for the staff level, but yes, the disruption of, you know, generative AI is certainly one of them, and we're trying to address that as well. And I suppose in a sense, UWE programs has been a good opportunity to go back to the sort of programmatic by design, and I think there was a legacy of a number of years changing things as we needed to ad hoc, and then that sort of internal coherence of the program being missed. So this is an opportunity to look at it again, but I think we can put all the effort on doing that, but as long as we keep on working on modular level, it's quite difficult to balance that, I
mean, if I could take you back to something that you said a few minutes ago, Khadiza, you were talking about the value of the session and how do students perceive the value of the session. So there are these practical things we can do around timetables and try and make them more programmatic and more friendly. But what do we need to do to convey to students the value of a session? Do you think we make the mistake of assuming that students know what they're going to get out of a session if they turn up?
Yeah, I think sometimes, I mean, we do a lot of, you know, things behind the scenes. Students do not know the complexity of, you know, all of the committee, all of the things that we're doing in the, you know, university is doing behind the scene. But then I think making students aware that these learning or these sort of resources or class or whatever you're doing, you know, when you're in the university, that it's going to help you, you know, get these sort of skills and all of that, and it's going to help you in the future if you're, you know, going for this career and all of that. Because I think when students are at uni, one of their focus is like, you know, what I'm going to do after I graduate. So if that's something that they're interested in, maybe focusing on that bit and trying to, you know, deliver those information in that prospect, I think student would be very interested, like, okay, that is actually helpful for me. Like if I'm in year 2 or year 3 and my module leader is telling me like, oh, you need to get this sorted so that, when you graduate, you can use this skill and then, those bits, if that makes sense.
Well, it's an investment, isn't it? We've got to get students really understanding that they are investing in their lives. Yeah. You wouldn't spend nearly £10,000 on a holiday and, only rock up for 1 week of it, would you? I wouldn't anyway.
It's a lot of money.
Well, exactly. And I think, they are investing in their future, which means they've actually got to put some time into it.
So going back to the expectations, so for them to be able to understand what the expectations are when this is their main sort of activity for these 3 years they're with us, even if we all have to work and, most of them are engaging in part-time work among other responsibilities. But it's sort of that very clear understanding from the very beginning that in order to do well, you need to put an awful amount of time, and that is what you are committing to do when you come here and are paying that amount of money. I mean, coming from Spain where education is basically free at universities, you just pay symbolic, whatever it is, €1,000, €2,000 a year, I always find very difficult to understand why you make that investment and then you don't come to the classes. But as I said, is that balance between having the expectation that you need to attend and you need to engage in all these other things, not just coming to the classroom, but also from our point of view, making sure that we are, giving them something that is worth attending and worth coming along. And I think it might be enough just having not a very good experience in one module right at the beginning when you think, actually, there's no point in me coming here every week. I can just catch up online to make that the norm. And moving on to particularly level 5 and level 6 and think that's going to be enough for me to pass. And it's not, because it can't be enough.
They're tricky, complex things to address, aren't they? Because, you talked earlier about recording sessions, but there's something about when you're recording a session, there's something that it cannot replicate. And it's like, how do we go into those honest spaces with students around, this is what this session was intended to do, and this is why you need to be here, and you might be able to catch part of it up by watching a recording, but you will be missing something crucial without making them feel as if...
Yeah, but the opportunity to talk to the peers, to the tutors, to be able to say, well, does this look good? Is there anything that you think I should be putting here that doesn't...
Yeah, whilst acknowledging that they're sometimes juggling quite difficult decisions. Do I take that shift and therefore be able to pay my rent this week?
But it is that, just talking about learning in the kind of wider sense. If you're in the classroom with other people and you're having these side conversations and that kind of stuff, you're getting more out of it than if you're sat in your bedroom. And we know what it's like as staff, because, you get more from corridor conversations with your colleagues than you would if you have to put a Teams meeting in because no one's on campus. So it is about that wider sense of learning when they're here and interacting with either staff or other students.
And I also think, as I mentioned earlier about the communication bit, sometimes student needs that motivation and encouragement. For example, if they're in class and then if they have a good relation with the, tutor, at least I had. So, if it comes from a staff that, oh, you're doing well, you're doing, this bit, you're improving, and then those, constant feedback, not only on assignment, but whatever you're doing, that might motivate them to come to classes, do their jobs and all of that. So I think that's a very important bit. Yeah.
And we're back again to the clarity of what the assessment is for, isn't it?
Yeah.
If students perceive the assessment is just for them to tell us what they know, you can understand why they would think, well, I don't need to be in class to do that because I can just pick that up somewhere else. So it's back to that clarity about what are we actually looking for in assessment and how does the student evidence that to us. We've touched on quite a few things. We've touched on students, we've touched on staff, we've touched on timetabling. But the university is a big place. There are lots of different functions within it, all of which interact. Are there any functions within the university you think that we've not touched on yet, which contributes to the way assessment plays out?
I would say the academic regulations.
The regulations, would you like to explain that?
Yeah, and maybe links nicely to the staff experience and, the sort of challenges that we were talking about earlier in terms of how you design a particular unit in your program to work in a particular way, to fit in with other units in that level of study, to sort of contribute to those wider program learning outcomes. And then when you start having the students not engaging, and they don't tend to just not engage in one, they don't engage in several, or they might decide to probably wrongly, how would I say, they not strategically, but they have this notion that they would be better off concentrating on particular things and leaving others half the way through without completing all the content, without attending all the sessions, which means then we are not able to support the students because half the way through they drop. We still have a whole range of activities that we wanted them to engage with so they could do really well in the assessment and advance that assessment. But then they disappear, and you just cannot support them in that way, which means then they take advantage of our uncapped reset policy and think, well, I'm going to concentrate on these two now, and I'll be fine because I can catch up online with things, and I just think I'll be able to do it myself come the reset period. But the reset period, we don't have the same level of support because we don't have the resource to do that. The students falsely have the perception that they're going to be able to do well, and typically they don't do so well. And then it's that frustration from the staff thinking, we could have supported you throughout the whole semester to do really well. Now we don't have access to you. You won't have opportunity to engage with all these activities that we put in place for you, and you're not going to do very well in the assessment because you haven't fully understood what was expected of you because you weren't in class. We didn't have the chance to discuss these things. And I think there is an element of that perhaps is not quite working out as we thought it might.
And I think from that point, I think the inclusive assessment should come in place because, every student, I mean, we talked about cost of living crisis, and there were a few students recently I met who were working around like more than 40 hours a week. And just imagine you're doing a full-time course with that, and also you need to pay your rent and all of that. So how do we make assessment more inclusive for those students? So I think the university has that responsibility to, for those students, to make it more inclusive and, so that they can actually do their degree alongside whatever work they're doing. And also, of course, I understand the students' perspective that they should be present, but then they should be given that opportunity to, get involved and, yeah.
And I think, obviously inclusivity has been a core part of UWE programs, and I think we've all had some really, really good conversations around what do we mean by inclusivity and what should be, an essential, what should be. We moved away from the word desirable, didn't we, last week?
Because everything in that list should be there too.
Yeah, but it is one of the things that I think we've got more to do with, and UWE programs, although it was supposed to be kind of completing in the next few months, we're nowhere near completing, and it's on the strategic plan for the next couple of years going forward as well. It's still there because I think there's still a lot we can do around inclusivity. There's a lot we can do, around online provision as well, because we've only just started in that area, and those students. Obviously, we wouldn't advocate for any full-time student doing a 40-hour week, but we do need to recognise that we need more flexibility in what we do because students don't, otherwise they drop out because they can't pay their rent or whatever it is. So I think we do need to kind of keep the lens of inclusivity very firmly on what we are delivering going forward. But I think that there are some infrastructure things. I mean, Maria's touched on the kind of systems. We know we've got to do things around, how do we make things more programmatic, not just the programme itself. And then that starts to make sense, I think, for the students in terms of how, and for the staff in terms of how things actually work. Because something like our exam board system, for example, we're still, and I know we're not completely programmatic yet, but we still are looking at our chunks of stuff. And then you get our external examiners who are saying, well, I'm a field external, so I'm looking at this set of modules, but I can't really see how that relates to the programme as a whole. Or you get our chief external examiners who are saying, well, I can't really understand what's happening in the programme because I'm only looking at it from this level. So I think there are loads of opportunities going forward to look at how we structure things, how we process things, and how our regs can be supportive. Because I think there is a misconception that our regs are sometimes quite tight and quite, there's very little sort of flexibility in them, but actually they are supposed to be guardrails to be able to do what is right for the student. We're trying to help students succeed, but also, how can we help them in the best way we can? And sometimes we go too far, and a student will, fail several times. And actually, we want to try and do the best for them and say, yeah, keep them on the programme. The regulations allow them to keep them on the programme, but sometimes that's not in the best interest of the student, and we need to be able to say, actually, student, come talk to us, maybe take a couple of years out, you've still got that learning, it's still going to be current if you just take some time out. And we've got to be a bit more flexible in terms of how we deliver our programmes, but also how we, for like a better word, administer our programmes, so that it is supporting the students through their learning journey. That's completely off the topic of assessment.
No, but I think you mentioned the external examiners, and we have had the recent examining boards. But I think there is an element linked to the scale of students going to resit now that is very difficult to really assess the performance of a particular cohort when just looking at June. What happened, and is that sort of sense of, the ones that got into it and they done relatively well, but it's just the other ones that didn't even put something for the sit. Then now they're sort of missing out on an opportunity to get that very important feedback to do better and go to the reset. And then perhaps they thought they were going to be prepared and they aren't. And then suddenly you're retaking a module as opposed to just taking the recent opportunity. And that's quite a concern among,
So I guess there's something about, as you were saying, Rachel, the intent beneath the regs is to be supportive. Yeah. And, applaud UWE for being bold enough to do different things in the regs compared to other universities. But how do we mitigate that potentially unintended consequence of elements of it possibly supporting students to procrastinate, which is what you were talking about earlier. Yeah. So what can we do to keep true to the spirit of the regs, which is supporting students to succeed?
I think if we do something from the very beginning, for example, if a program starts and we have amazing starting block and all of that, if we, for example, if I was a tutor, I would have gone to a class and I asked, okay, who in this class who has procrastination problem? And then I would just literally go through that, sometimes student would have this sort of issue, and they would keep the work till the last moment and would do this. So for those students, if you feel, you have procrastination issue, then we have this group where you can join, and then, maybe that group, it's an
We'd all be in it though, Khadiza. I'd be there.
It's an ideal world. And then, maybe helping those students, throughout, how to get out of those procrastination. Of course, they have, there are specialists, experts, who can actually help those students, because this is an issue that's, it's not few students. It's it's increasing day by day.
I think it goes back to the literacy thing that we were talking earlier. I think the uncapped resit is a last resort if something has happened kind of thing. But I think the fact that some students are now seeing this as, I'm going to spread out my workload between now and July, as that's absolutely fine, and they have normalized that. I think that is the problem. That wasn't the intended purpose of the assessment regulation, the academic regulation, but that is effectively what's happening.
But do you think there's something as well about a responsibility that we've got to help students to contextualise the impact of that assessment on a final mark? Because a student faced with, we're all human, faced with something I have to do tomorrow and it seems enormous, but actually if I don't do as well as I was hoping to do on that, probably the impact on a final mark is not that big. By the time you take into account it might be a task which is worth 30% of a 30 credit module, but do we do enough, do you think, to help students understand the role this thing in front of you today makes to that final piece of work?
I will argue that might be the opposite, that they are really focusing on that degree outcome And if I have an opportunity to get 5% more here or 10% more in this piece of assessment, it might make a difference. And that's why I think I'm going to be strategic by allowing myself as much time as possible.
I think that's what I mean about contextualise though, because an extra 20% on a 30% component on a 15 credit module.
But we're not having many more. We're not having so many tasks anymore.
No, we're not. That's true.
So everything now counts.
Oh, no,
yeah.
could get worse.
But yeah.
I think that sounds like, they want more time. I mean, if I have 4 exams in 1 month, I would definitely try to schedule each of them okay, I need to start working on this date, this on this date, and then writing, reading, and all of that. So yeah, I mean, are we what's the word when 2 exam clashed? Yeah. Is it exam bunching? So we need to figure out if we're having exam bunching. I know, Cathy, that you would say we do not see from this level that if exam is bunching it or not. But then, yeah, that time, I mean, I think students need that sort of time to manage their, exams. And also if we can notify students, I know students hate emails and all of those notifications, but then have you started your assignment? Those with reminder.
But that comes back to assessment at the end, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's true.
And again, hopefully with UWE programs, we'll have reduced the amount of assessment. Yeah. So, having heard student feedback about assessment overload, assessment bunching, staff feedback, the same.
Do you think we have a common understanding about what an assessment bunch is?
I think we've done a lot of progress there, and I don't think there's much bunching happening. Well, again, I can only speak for what I know, but I think it's, again, about making sure students understand that time management is also a very valuable skill that they need to come up with when they go into their work experience. And you're not going to be able to say, well, this is the deadline, but I don't very much like this one. I'm going to take the next one, which is in a month's time. And it's important that we use those first years to make sure we all understand, are on the same page of this is what you need to do to achieve this, and moving on to year 2 and year 3, you have very good understanding that you need to work from the very beginning of the term on how you're going to be managing these multiple deadlines. And I think the way we are moving through UWE programs is also most assessments will be from the beginning, and there will be scaffolding, and they will be supporting through the week. I think we have had this conversation too. My concern is that lowest stake practice, when we're trying to say, well, we only have 1 assessment point for a 15 credit, it makes it very difficult to build this sort of, lowest stake points where the student can test and practice and fail and get some feedback and do better later. So I guess that's the only thing that maybe the one-size-fits-all might not work, and particularly in foundation in year 1, that areas where we want to keep that sort of progressive.
It's getting the balance right, though, isn't it? It's because we want the early low stakes piece of work so that we can see, what support does the student need. They can get some feedback, different experience of HE. For a lot of our students, it's completely different educational system. So we want to keep that, but obviously, we also want to try and reduce the number of pieces so that it's not overloading people. It's just getting that balance right.
Yeah, and I think the earlier years are places where we could still pilot those things and work with the students to get that baselines, to put them in the best place, to then do well in the later years. So yeah.
And maybe there's a bit of a mismatch of expectations going on here as well, which might be contributing to things like, frustration in the NSS and things like that. If from one end, as staff set an assessment diaries, we're thinking 4 exams in a month, to picking up your example, Khadiza, that's reasonable, and then students saying it's not reasonable. So there's an element of, okay, well, how are we pragmatically explaining why it is what it is?
That's where the, procrastination bit comes in. And I'll just read from one of my notes, if that's okay. So, for example, I wrote, different assessment forms can allow for diverse feedback mechanisms. For instance, dialogic feed-forward coursework, where students discuss drafts with tutors, which has actually shown positive, results in many cases. I was watching some YouTube videos earlier. So that's why I was like, okay, now this is interesting. So yeah, if we can, think about that, maybe having that first draft for the first sit. Oh, you have this opportunity to, you know, speak with your tutor. I know the staff have, like, you know, time constraint, like they have lots of things on their plate. But then if we can manage that, that might be helpful, who knows.
And they can use Studiosity as well.
Oh yeah,
I'll get a plug in there.
come on.
Plug in there for
Jackie Chan will be
Studiosity.
proud of you.
Use Studiosity.
But also, going back to the time management, another plug for the library. We've got so much on offer for our students, and we, you know, it's usually the ones who possibly don't need it that take up these opportunities. So how do we get the rest of our student body really taking up every opportunity that they get here?
That's a vodcast, I think, for another day, Rachel.
No, it won't be with me.
Won't be with you. Okay. Determined to leave us on a high. One really last final quick comment from each of you. Not everything we do here at UWE needs to be improved. We do great things as well. What's something that you think is brilliant about the way our assessment ecosystem works?
I think the level of support that the students get in this university is unmatched, and I have colleagues in many other universities, and yeah, I think that's the real added value of UWE.
It's not only assessment. I think in every sort of, you know, ways in what UWE does is that, you know, they incorporate student voice in it, which is amazing because they want to know what actually student, you know, what the student feedback is, what student actually wants, and they want to, you know, work on it, which is amazing. And I think that's one of UWE's strength. And yeah.
Thanks, Khadiza. Rachel, wowers.
Oh no, pressure. No, I mean, I think, you know, we say we're a practice-led institution, don't we? And I think that really we demonstrate that a lot through what we do with our assessment, both from a authenticity perspective. But, you know, if you take things like some of the simulation stuff that happens in health and social well-being, for example, or some of the stuff in engineering, or the, you know, the briefs that you have in architecture, it really, really is preparing students for going out. There's still some way to go, and if, you know, we do want to try and move away from 3-hour exams where appropriate, because obviously some of them are still appropriate, but I just think that's one of the things that we do really, really well, is that absolutely authentic practice.
Thank you, Rachel. That's a really positive note to end on, and we know our students echo that comment because it's in all of our course surveys, and I agree with you. I think it's something we're really, really good at. So thank you very much for tuning in to this episode of Higher Education Matters. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. And please tune in next time to find out what brilliant things we're going to be talking about next.